Hey guys, Will here. So today we're going to be taking a look at the CAMMUS LC100 load cell sim racing pedals. Now these, on paper at least, seem like really amazing value at just $259 US plus taxes and shipping. But how do they stack up against the competition, and what do they actually like to drive with? Well, that's what we're going to be finding out in today's video. So stick around, this should be an interesting one. Okay, so before we dive into these pedals today, firstly, a couple of quick housekeeping things, just so you have the full context of exactly what we're doing today. So firstly, a big thank you to CAMMUS for sending across these pedals for us to check out. Now, we will be cross-comparing against a couple of other pedal sets throughout today's review as well. So it's important that you guys are aware that all the equipment that we'll be referencing today has all been sent to us under the exact same conditions. We do have some discount codes available down in the description box below for various different brands. So if you are looking at picking up any sim racing gear, whether it's pedals or anything else, definitely worth the time to jump down into those links in the description, or just hit up boostedmedia.net and yeah, see if there's a discount code that might help you there. And that's also a fantastic way of helping support the channel at no additional cost to you. So we really do appreciate your support there. But as is always the case here at Boosted Media, no sort of third-party influence at all on what we're going to be talking about today, purely just my own observations and my own opinions of this product and the products that we'll be comparing to. So let's dive into the LC100 pedals now, starting off with a little bit about pricing. So as mentioned in the introduction, these do come in at a very aggressive price point, as we've come to expect from CAMMUS. They've obviously been shaking up the market quite a bit with some of their direct drive wheelbases. A weak point in their lineup or their ecosystem up until this point has definitely been the pedals, as you would have seen in our C5 and our C12 reviews. That now thankfully has changed with these LC100 load cell pedals. So these come in at $259 US. You will need to factor in local shipping and taxes on top of that as well. Now their website is a little bit confusing. You have a couple of different options depending on what kind of shipping method you want. So what I would recommend doing there is just jump on their website and make sure that that is accurate information at the time that you're watching the video. Also check for local resellers as well, because that might be a great way to save you a little bit of extra money on import duties, taxes and whatnot too. So do your own research with regards to that. But of course, do also just factor in that 5% discount code that we do have if you're buying directly from CAMMUS as well. So where does that place these pedals in the market? It puts them about $40 US cheaper than the Fanatec CSL Elite V2 pedals, which if you've watched any of my pedal reviews in the last couple of years now, you would know these are currently my top pick for the best value for money sim racing pedals available on the market. And if you're wondering why I feel that way about these pedals, well, you're in luck, because we do have a full detailed review going through all the things that you might need to know if you're looking at buying a set of these pedals or comparing them against any other options available on the market. Now, there are a couple of other options that we have tested over the years here as well, so we'll quickly reference them for you as well. There is the Acertec SimSports La Prima pedals, which we were also very impressed with. They are a little bit more expensive, coming in at $335 US at the time that we're making this. And again, of course, check their pricing. We do have a 5% discount code available for them too, linked down in the description below. As you can see here, that is a 2-pedal set, so you don't get the clutch included in the price there. There is also the Thrustmaster TLCM pedals, which I don't have in the studio with me right now. We've tested those in the past. Look, I've never been particularly impressed with those pedals for the price. They just don't really provide the same kind of driving experience like we get from any of these other options that we've just referenced. But they do have one very important advantage over any of these other pedal sets that we've just referenced, and that is the fact that they are able to be used independently of a sim rig. So you don't necessarily have to have them attached to a cockpit or even fixed to your chair to have a good driving experience overall, whereas any of these pedal sets, you will have to have them in some sort of a fixed form so that they're not going to slide across the floor, or your chair's not going to roll back when you push the pedal. That is the case for most load cell pedals, but the TLCMs are designed in a way which is quite intelligent to allow a little bit more versatility in that sense. So if you're somebody that brakes with a relatively light foot, or you're not quite ready to step up into a cockpit style sim racing setup, then those might be a more suitable option for you. And at the time that we're recording this, those come in around about the same kind of price point as the LC100s, give or take 10 bucks or so. But again, of course, do your own research there. So that gives you a quick rundown of where these are placed in the market compared to some of the other pedal sets that we've tested. Now, if you happen to own a pedal set that comes in around this same kind of price point that we haven't mentioned here, please do share your experience with that pedal set down in the comments below, so that people that are researching these pedals have as much information as possible to keep them as informed as possible. That's a really great way that you guys can help support the wider community. So really do appreciate your support there too. So there's a quick breakdown on pricing. Let's dive into these pedals now, see exactly what you're getting for the money. So what are we actually getting for our 250 bucks here? Now you'll notice straight away, they have the overall presentation of a more high-end set of pedals. So straight away, they appear like they're punching above their weight a little bit here, even compared to something like the CSL Elite V2 pedals that we were looking at just a moment ago. Nice sort of diamond cut edges on the CNC machine aluminium that they're using for the construction of the pedals themselves, although they do actually say that the pedal arms are steel. When I tested with a magnet, there's no magnetism there at all. So I'm pretty sure that those are aluminium. The pedal pads themselves are steel, the base plate is steel, and a few other elements around the place as well are steel, as we'll get into a little bit later on. But look, a pretty basic construction overall. They're using Hall effect sensors for both the throttle and the clutch pedal. That means no mechanical moving parts that can take on dirt and debris and wear out or become inconsistent over time. Pretty standard to see that on most pedal sets around this kind of price point and more high end these days, but obviously a good design choice there. In terms of resolution, they don't actually advertise the sensitivity or the resolution of the throttle and the clutch pedal, but I can tell you in the driving experience, absolutely no issues with sensitivity at all there, so I don't imagine anybody's going to have a problem with that. And then they're using a 100 kilogram Mavin load cell for the brake pedal. We'll get into all the details of how that all works mechanically in just a moment there. So in terms of ergonomic adjustability, not a whole lot available here. We don't have any adjustment on the pedal faces themselves, so even though we do have these additional holes, you can see those holes are actually smaller than the ones that it's fixed to the pedal upright on, so you can't really adjust the pedal pads up, down, left or right like you can with some other pedal sets. There's no angle adjustment in the base plate itself with these pedals, unlike what you would find on, say, your Husingfeld Sprint or designs similar to that. Now, even though on the base plate there is a little bit of adjustment, as you can see, forward and back in terms of these holes that you can actually mount the pedals to, because of the way that they've designed these, there's an M8 bolt at the back of the brake pedal, but then everything else is M6. But you'll notice there's only actually one slot on the base plate there, which is suitable for an M8 bolt. So that means that you can move the clutch and the throttle pedal forward and back through an adjustment range there of about 30 millimeters in 15 mil steps, but you can't actually move the brake pedal back or forward on that base plate. You can only adjust the relative position between the brake, throttle, and clutch, if that makes sense. Now, while we've got the pedal tray tilted up like this, another complaint that I have with regards to the pedal tray, actually two complaints here. The pedal tray itself is actually quite short. If I hold it up like this, you can see, and you'll be able to see in this driving footage as well, my heel, and I've got a size 11 US foot, so not a massive foot, but not a small foot either, but my heel actually rests right up the very edge of this pedal tray. So although the design here does look quite cool, I would like to see a slightly larger tray. The main complaint that I have with regards to the base plate and mounting, just while we're under here looking at this, is the fact that the pedals bolt in from the underside. Now, because there's no countersunk bolts here, what that means is if you're wanting to mount this on a standard kind of pedal tray, or even aluminium profile can be quite difficult as well, you're going to have some kind of a spacer between this and whatever you're mounting it to. Otherwise, you're not going to have adequate clearance for these bolts. So definitely a bit of a design oversight, I would say. If you're going to have a design like that, you need to at least include spacers so that it's not going to be hindering being able to mount these pedals. But there are plenty of mounting holes along the top. Obviously, with a design like this, you're not going to be able to use this on carpet or on the floor. But look, with the stiffness that we have here in this particular brake pedal, as we'll get onto in the driving experience in just a moment, you wouldn't be using these kinds of pedals on the floor anyway, because they just slide around and it would not be a good experience at all. So this is going to be something that's going to be limited to mounting on some sort of a wheel and pedal deck or a dedicated cockpit, just so that you guys are aware. So that gives you everything you need to know in terms of actually mounting these pedals to the rig. Of course, have the ability to remove these pedals from the base plate and hard mount them directly to your sim racing cockpit. Although, because these aren't using standard spacing, you most likely will end up having to drill holes to do so, and you will also need to be able to access from the underside unless you drill out the threads on these and bolt them in from the top. So just be aware of that as well. But I think most people at this kind of price point will probably be using the included base plate, so just be aware of those limitations in terms of mounting. So just lastly, while we still have all three pedals mounted on the base plate here, let's just quickly talk about the cabling inputs and outputs and whatnot. So you can see the clutch and the brake both connect back to the throttle pedal, which has the main controller included. Now, interestingly, in their instruction manual, they referenced a separate control box, but in the pedals that we received, it's actually integrated into the throttle pedal quite cleanly here. As you can see, there's no external control box. It's all just housed inside this little enclosure here. There's a USB-C connection on the back there for connecting back to your PC, not console compatible in case you were wondering, and it does come with a 2-meter USB-C cable for those who might be wondering about that. There's also a CAN bus port here available too for connecting other additional accessories, although we don't have any information on what might be releasing in the future on that, and that appears to be just a standard RJ style connection on the back there. So yeah, pretty simple in terms of wiring, and the cable management here is relatively tidy, I would say. There's some little cable management clips integrated into the base plate, so yeah, no difficulties plugging things in, and not too much risk of snagging cables on your feet or anything like that either. So let's get these pedals removed from the base plate now and take a look at each one of them in some more detail. So let's dive in now, take a closer look at the specifics related to each one of the three pedals. Now, if we quickly remove the brake pedal from the equation here and just take a look at our throttle and our clutch pedal, you'll notice that these are pretty much identical to each other, with the only differences being the spring used in each of them and the fact that the electronics are housed in the throttle pedal, as we discussed earlier. Now, just on the subject of electronics, I should quickly touch on the software here as well. I'm not going to have a whole software section in this video because the software is very basic, very easy to use, and it's not really anything that you guys haven't already seen before in other pedal review videos. So we do have an adjustment here for our minimum and maximum threshold. So if you want to work a little bit of dead zone into the bottom end of your pedal, if you tend to rest your foot on the brake like I tend to do, you can do that. We also do have non-linear response curves available here too for all three of the pedals. But if you are driving a high power rear wheel drive car, for example, that comes on throttle very aggressively and you want to tame that down a little bit for corner exit, you could set a curve like that for your throttle so it comes on a little bit less aggressively. Or if you're driving an underpowered car that you want to come on throttle much more aggressively on corner exit, then you could go the opposite way to achieve that. Likewise with the clutch as well, although there isn't a rollover point on this clutch like many others, it is a linear response in the pedal in terms of the mechanical feel. If you want to adjust so that you've got a flatter area in the middle so that it comes on a little bit less aggressively, or you've got a little bit more play within the bite point for the car that you're driving, you can achieve that as well. So really you can just fine tune here. You can adjust the nodes to your individual preference or just select from any one of the presets that you see here. And really the software is as simple as that. So let's look at these pedals in more detail now. So really the only mechanical differences between these two pedals are just the fact that the electronics are housed within the throttle pedal. There is a link cable here which goes from our clutch pedal across to the throttle pedal, as you saw when it was all wired up earlier. And again, just to reiterate, both of these pedals are using contactless Hall effect sensors to sense the position of the pedal. The only other mechanical difference here, as you guys can see, is just the differences in the two springs here. The clutch spring is quite a lot stiffer than the spring that they include with the throttle. And there's no additional springs or elastomers or anything like that included in the kit, which is one thing I think they could improve just to give you a little bit more adjustability, although I don't really think that you can complain too much given the price point here and what you're getting for your money. So in terms of adjustment here, basically the same across both of these pedals. We've got a little preload spring adjustment here, which you can wind in or out, and it's got a little retainer nut there as well to stop it from becoming loose and adjusting itself while you're driving, which is a good thing to see. Some much more expensive pedal sets than these haven't included that, and that's something that I've complained about in previous reviews, so I think it's only fair that we call out the fact that they have included it on these pedals. So all we need to do here, and the same goes for both pedals, is just loosen off the little retainer here with a spanner. I already loosened that off a little bit just so I wouldn't be fumbling around on camera. And then once that is no longer locked in position, you can see they've actually included a little spring washer in there as well, which is something that I haven't actually seen on any pedal set before, but I think a very sensible addition here. So that then allows us to wind in and out the preload on our throttle spring. The more we wind it out, the slacker it's going to feel overall, and the more we wind it in, you guessed it, the stiffer that initial uptake is going to feel in the pedal. So there are a couple of other holes here as well. That is simply just so they can have the same upright design across all three pedals. So you'll notice on the clutch it's actually in the bottom position, the throttle it's in the middle position, and on the brake the damper is using the top position, and the elastomer and spring stack is using the bottom position. So that's what we have there in terms of preload adjustment. You'll also notice inside the spring here, there's a couple of little spaces. Now they don't include any additional washers here, but if you do want to increase or decrease the total amount of travel available here, or the bump stop range, you can either take out one of these spaces or add additional washers or spaces in here if you can find something with the right inner diameter, and that will allow you to limit the amount of travel. Basically what happens is when you push the pedal down, those spaces hit the Teflon or plastic bump stop there, and that's what limits the mechanical travel of the pedal. Now I like that design as well because it means there's no metal to metal contact with the bump stop, which means the pedal is nice and quiet in operation, and that goes for both pedals, the clutch and the throttle as well. So exactly the same adjustment on the clutch as well. There's no need to go through exactly the same thing there. And honestly, I think that covers off everything you need to know about the clutch and throttle pedal. So let's take a closer look at the brake now. This is where things get a little bit more complicated. So you can see there the cable coming off the Maven 100 kilogram load cell, same exact load cell that we see in a lot of other pedal sets, and the model, in case you're wondering, is NA151. So there's a couple of really important things to understand here about the design of the pedal to ensure that you actually get this dialed in correctly. Because as I mentioned earlier in the video, the way these came out of the box actually didn't provide a good driving experience at all. And it wasn't until I made some adjustments that it pretty much completely transformed the overall experience using the brake. So pay attention to this part of the video. I know that these details can get a little bit boring, but it's definitely something that's important to understand here. So we're going to talk about the damper a little bit later and how that sort of all ties in with what we're doing here. Let's start off firstly by talking about the elastomer stack. Now, unlike what we saw with the throttle and clutch pedal, we don't have that little retainer nut on the preload spring here. I didn't notice this coming loose over time. It is actually quite stiff to rotate there. So didn't have any issues with that. That doesn't necessarily mean that you won't have any issues either, but yeah, it was absolutely fine for us. So when you push down on the pedal, what's happening is this elastomer stack is basically compressing. Now, the weaker areas are going to compress first, and then you guessed it, the stiffer elastomer at the back is going to compress second. So as we push down the pedal, and you guys should be able to see in the footage here, the spring compresses first. We then have this little spacer in between there, which limits the amount of compression available to that spring. So once we push the pedal down to the point where that spring is compressed up and that spacer is making contact on both sides, then all the additional force that we're going to put into the pedal is all going to go through that elastomer. So that is what gives us the two-stage braking feel, the spring providing that initial uptake, and then the elastomer providing the rest of the resistance there. So again, although they don't include any other springs or spacers inside the kit, there's nothing stopping you from cutting that shorter or replacing it with some other sort of spacer or washer to dial that into exactly how you like. And look, for me personally, I would prefer a little bit less initial uptake. You can wind in that preload a little bit further than it was by default, but even then I would prefer a little bit less, but that is purely just a subjective personal preference thing. The point I'm trying to make here is that it is important to experiment with this stuff to really get these pedals dialed into exactly what you personally like. So that elastomer and spring stack is what's primarily responsible for providing the resistance that you feel against your foot as you push down on the brake pedal. Now, the way that's actually interpreted as an amount of braking force inside the sim is via the load cell here. So this entire section on the back here, as you can see, if we hold it around this way, you can see when you push down, you're pushing on this assembly in here. That whole assembly actually pivots around this joint here, and then that deflects the back end of the load cell. So as we push into the pedal, this load cell actually has what's called a strain gauge inside, and the front half of it is bolted to the cage, so actually fixed to your rig. And then the back end flexes relative to the front side, depending on how much force you're exerting through the face of the pedal. And that deflection is what's actually interpreted as the amount of force or braking force inside the sim. So the important thing to understand here is that this mechanism that's attached to the elastomer stack exclusively, not the damper, and that's going to become important in just a moment, is able to slightly flex, and that is what deflects the strain gauge inside the load cell there. And you can see that's the reason why you've got that little area there. When you push into the pedal, and you won't be able to see it with me just pushing down on my hand, you probably won't even see it on camera in the driving footage, but that will actually move a small amount relative to the cage of the pedal, and that is what gives you your braking force. Now, the reason why I'm going into that detail is because there is one thing about the design of these pedals which I don't think is a particularly wise choice, and that is the way that the damper is implemented. So the damper is actually fixed against the main shell or the main chassis of the pedal. You can see it's bolted in on these sides here. So the force that we exert on the damper doesn't actually relay through the load cell. And when this damper isn't adjusted correctly, it can actually create a mechanical bump stop. And once you push to that point, no additional force that you put into the pedal is actually going to go through that load cell. So you're effectively creating a hard bump stop for the pedal. And that's the way it was actually adjusted out of the box. So just to reiterate, as this particular pedal came out of the box on our sample, I can't say for certain that it's going to be the same for what you guys receive, but when you pushed in on the pedal, if you put too much force in, this part of the clevis here would actually make contact with the nose of the damper, and that would mechanically limit how much force you could put into the pedal. Now, if you're used to using a position-based brake pedal, that is obviously going to have a hard stop at some point where you can't mechanically push the pedal any further, and that would create your 100% braking force point. With a load cell pedal, what I generally recommend for most sim racing titles is that you calibrate your initial kind of threshold point, or the point where you feel that you can hit in terms of braking force consistently at around 80% braking force inside the game. That then allows you to modulate in either direction from that point. So if you need to get in a little bit more pressure, if you're finding you're not quite slowing up enough, you can put that little bit more in, modulate your braking to slow up and meet the apex correctly. And conversely to that, of course, as you trail brake into a corner, so as you lift off the brake, as you're asking more of the tire in terms of turning, you want to be lifting off and modulating in that direction. So for games like Assetto Corsa Competizione, for example, where you're relying more heavily on ABS, a lot of people recommend for ACC that you just calibrate the pedal to 100% at the threshold point, and you don't really need to modulate beyond that. So in that case, it wouldn't be such an issue, but if you wanted to calibrate the brake the way I like to do it, then that certainly does become an issue. So what I would recommend you do is loosen off these little nuts here, and you actually want to adjust the position of the damper here. So what you're aiming to achieve here is that the damper sits back as far as it can without becoming non-captive. So you can see if I go too far, then the damper starts to just kind of slop around. And in fact, if we go too loose, you'll actually notice that they have sandwiched inside this assembly here a little grub screw. It just fell out here to act as a little spacer because the stem of the damper actually isn't quite long enough to get the job done properly. So they've included that as a little fix, which works absolutely fine. So what you want to do is push that damper in to the point where there's no slack in it and it's engaged straight away as you push the pedal. If you go too far the other way, then the damper's not going to have any impact on what you feel through the pedal. But in our case, how this actually came out of the box was this damper was actually pushed in quite far. And as you can imagine, if we wind this in, what we're effectively doing is reducing the maximum amount of range of movement in the damper here. And then as you can see here, we're limited by the amount of travel available in that damper. Now this is the area of the design that I don't like, simply because I don't think that you should be relying on the clevis smacking into the nose of the damper, and you can see it's got a little circlip sitting in there to seal the fluid in there. It's not really designed as something that you should be putting force into regularly. And you can imagine if you're putting 100 kilograms of force into the brake pedal, that's a lot of force to be putting on the nose of something that isn't really designed to take that kind of force. And it of course has a detrimental effect on the driving experience too. So wind that out, get it to the point where the damper is just engaged with no slack, but as far back as possible in doing so. And that allows us enough range of movement in the damper to not interfere. So of course, inevitably at some point you are still going to make contact if you put enough force into the pedal, but realistically the spring and elastomer stack here is providing enough resistance that you'd have to put absolutely crazy amounts of force in to get it to deflect far enough to max out the travel on here. So what it does still do is mechanically limit the deflection in our elastomer. You can imagine if this wasn't here, when I push the pedal with all of my strength, that elastomer is deforming well beyond its design tolerances, and that will fail relatively quickly in that kind of scenario. But again, we're putting forces into the pedal here that aren't really realistic under normal driving conditions. So I just wanted to explain that to you simply because that was one problem that I found with the way the pedals were configured out of the box, and it did genuinely transform the driving experience once I figured that out and adjusted it appropriately. This was actually very nearly a negative review with regards to the feeling of the brake pedal, but once I figured that out, yeah, it really did transform the driving experience. So I can't emphasize enough just how important it is to take the time to understand this and adjust the brake pedal appropriately. But look, other than that, across all three pedals, you can see the quality of the build is actually really good again for the price point. You can see they have used ball bearing mechanisms at the pivot point for the pedal arm here. And look, it does all present as very high quality. The one thing that I did notice in relation to the driving experience across all three pedals though, is that they do feel a little bit bindy, a little bit grainy underfoot. They're just not quite as smooth underfoot as the other pedal sets that we talked about earlier on in today's video. So just look, with regards to the throttle pedal, you do feel just an ever so slight sensation of texture as you push down the pedal, just as that metal pin slides through the sleeve there. Now I believe that this is made of some sort of Teflon or nylon material. It doesn't appear to be just a cheap plastic, but there is a tiny little bit of slack there. So obviously the machining tolerances aren't quite as fine as we find on some higher end sets of pedals. So that does just add a little bit of movement there. Although in terms of flex and rigidity in the pedal set overall, there's no excessive play or movement side to side, but it does just have an ever so slight tendency to bind up a little bit and just not always be completely consistent underfoot, at least in my experience. But again, if you own a set of these pedals, let us know what your experience is like in the comments down below. Likewise with the clutch pedal, of course, being exactly the same design, maybe a little bit less so because it is a stronger spring here, which kind of counteracts some of those sensations. But the point here is that the tolerances just aren't quite as fine as what we would find on more expensive pedal sets. But again, for the price point, I don't really see that to be something to complain about, just something to be aware of. Now, with regards to the brake pedal, what I did find is that you do feel a sensation of the elastomer kind of binding up a little bit on pedal release sometimes. And sometimes when you're really starting to get into the pedal and put quite a bit of force into it, as I mentioned earlier, I brake with about 70 to 80 kilograms of braking force. Generally, I do find that as that elastomer compresses up, it does tend to kind of want to jump a little bit. It's not a completely smooth transition. And admittedly, that is something that we have noticed on some other pedal sets that have been a lot more expensive than this as well. At the lower kind of braking forces, so say 20 kilos through to maybe say 50 kilos or so, really wasn't an issue, again, in my experience. And it is reduced by lubricating the shaft with either there's some lithium grease or PTFE lubricant. Can actually see a little bit of lithium grease residue on this as it came from factory. So look, it does certainly help, but you will find over time it will start to bind up a little bit more, and you will start to lose some of that finesse in the braking sensation. But I really am kind of getting into the nitpicking kind of side of things here. So the point I'm trying to make here is that it isn't completely maintenance free, but if you do take care of it, you shouldn't have too many issues with these kinds of things. So really the only two major nitpicks that I have when it comes to the driving experience is just the lack of adjustability overall, both in terms of ergonomic adjustment or angle adjustment, and also the fact that they don't include any other springs or elastomers or spacers to really dial things in to get them exactly how you might like them. I think they could make all three pedals quite a lot more versatile by doing so. Maybe they'll sell it as an upgrade kit like what we've seen from some other manufacturers into the future, so we'll definitely keep an eye on that. Then just quickly with regards to heel and toe style driving as well, I did find that the edges of the pedal pads are quite sharp. Heel and toeing with just socks or bare feet wasn't a very fun experience at all, just because the edges here are quite sharp. But with boots on, it really wasn't an issue. You just need to make sure, of course, that it's not cutting into the side of your boots, and just adjust your technique appropriately. Admittedly, this has been a complaint that I've had with a lot of pedal sets that are a lot more expensive than these are. So it's probably a technique issue on my side, honestly, rather than something to complain about with the pedals, but it was something that I did notice. So I just thought it was worth pointing out to you guys as well. So let's now bring everything together and summarize the experience using these CAMMUS LC100 load cell pedals. Now, look, I've got to say, for the money, these things have actually really surprised me. Look, when CAMMUS first came out, the first product we looked at was the C5. And while in terms of the actual driving experience, it was pretty darn good for the money, there were quite a few things about the design of that, which we kind of just thought, you know, why would they do it that way? And then again, with the C12, again, the driving experience of that was pretty fantastic, honestly. But there were just a few things about the design that we were just like, you know, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people kind of maybe aren't taking CAMMUS seriously because of some of those elements. And they do have some other products that we haven't looked at just yet, and we will be looking at those pretty soon as well, some more conventional sim racing style products. But really the weakness, as I said in the opening of this video, was the pedals that they had on offer. So I'm really happy to say that these pedals, as an overall driving experience, for the money, for the price point, I think actually do a very good job. Now look, I'm just gonna be completely honest with you guys. I expected these things to start to fall apart and fail, and just I expected a lot of shortcomings to kind of present themselves over time driving with these pedals. But honestly, to this point at least, I haven't really come across any major issues other than just some of the design shortcomings that we discussed earlier on in today's video. As an overall driving experience, the observations that I would have is just that it feels a little bit unrefined compared to some of the competitor products, particularly the CSL Elite V2 pedals. That feels to me like a product from a company that's been making pedals for a long time and really has a good understanding, good fundamental understanding of exactly what sim racers want out of a pedal set. This feels to me a little bit more like a company that has kind of looked at other competitor products and gone, how many features from those more expensive pedals can we cram into a cheaper product at a as cheaper price point as we possibly can? And that's kind of the reason why I expected the experience as a whole to maybe start to fall apart a little bit. But look, honestly, that hasn't really been the experience here. They really kind of do everything that they need to do in terms of the throttle and the clutch pedal. They're pretty unremarkable. I'm not particularly sensitive when it comes to those anyway, but there is a little bit of adjustment available there in terms of preload, as you guys saw. Not a whole lot in terms of other adjustability, but they really do give you everything you need out of a throttle and a clutch pedal, I would say. With the brake, it does give you that genuine two-stage braking feel. There is a clearly defined threshold point there that you can modulate around. You do, as we mentioned, just need to be very careful that the damper is adjusted correctly, unlike the way it was out of the box on our particular sample. So definitely make sure you check that adjustment and make sure you adjust it as we discussed in the earlier part of the video if you do buy a set of these pedals. But yeah, look, everywhere you look, I'd say for the money, they do a really good job. Again, just do be aware that even though they have a relatively low price point, these are a more high-end style sim racing pedal set that you will need to have fixed to some sort of a solid wheel deck and pedal deck or some sort of a cockpit. So just be aware of that. If you do buy these pedals expecting to just be able to run them on the floor without being fixed to your chair in some way, you are going to have a bad time. That's not the pedal's fault. It's just a limitation of this style of pedal set. And as I mentioned right at the start of today's video when we were doing some of those price comparisons, pretty much any other load cell pedal set that you could compare to this is quite similar in that regard, with the exception of the Thrustmaster TLCMs, which have other shortcomings but are a little bit more suitable to more entry-level sort of style setups. But look, overall, I do think that they provide a really good experience. Putting myself in the position of somebody about to drop this kind of money on a pedal set, I don't think you're going to be disappointed with them. Would I buy this pedal set over the Fanatec CSL Elite V2s? Probably not at this point, because they do feel just a little bit more refined overall. They do have a little bit more adjustment available in terms of the brake feel, even though these do have that damper, and they just feel a little bit more refined, a little bit smoother underfoot overall. And for that reason, they are worth the extra money to me subjectively. But of course, in saying that, customer service is also a very important consideration there as well. So just make sure you do your research into the current situation facing Fanatec. They are going through quite some significant changes at the moment, as we've discussed in our review videos on some of their products recently. So definitely do your own research there. Compared to the Acertec La Prima pedals, again, those do feel a little bit more refined, a little bit smoother underfoot than what we have here. But of course, depending on how much it's actually going to cost you to get a set of those pedals, once you factor in any other additional costs related to either these or those pedals, they may well end up being quite a bit more expensive than what we have here, particularly once you add in the clutch pedal on top of that as well. So look, I think bang for buck wise, these do a really good job. As I said before, if you buy a set of these pedals, I really don't think you're going to be disappointed with them. And it's really as simple as that. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you own a set of these pedals? Have you been impressed with them? Have you run into any issues, anything that we've covered or not covered in today's video? Please do let us know your experiences down in the comments below, so that people watching this video looking at buying a set of pedals are as informed as possible. Thank you very much for your support there. But above all, thank you very much for watching the video. Don't forget those discount codes linked down in the description below if you're looking at picking up any sim racing gear, whether it's these pedals or anything else. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye.